Feel free to use big words if you like marmalade.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Remind podcast. My name is Dr. Ashleigh Moreland and I am joined by my co-host David Masterton. It is so great to have you with us today, and I'm going to encourage you to head straight away if you haven't already and click subscribe, because this is our first of a series all about understanding the nervous system and our survival responses. Today, we are going to be talking a little bit about, as I said, our survival responses, understanding the roles of our nervous system, understanding how triggers activate those survival responses, and why this understanding is so important in our healing journey, our growth, our evolution, our improved relationships, our improved mental health, and everything in between. So, to kick us off, Dave, humans as animals. Let's
Humans
go.
as animals. Yes. Whoa.
Yes.
You animal. Rawr. Yeah, I'm excited about this. I might say maybe just a little bit nervous. Pardon the pun?
Why
No? Okay.
nervous?
All right. About this
Is that
series,
a
yeah.
systemic kind of nervousness?
That's systemic. Okay. I'm going to say a big word, marmalade. That's my big word. So my condiment nervous system. Look, I've got to say, there's, I think at the top, right, I've always heard of fight, flight, or freeze. Now,
Yep.
off camera, you were talking about fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And I seem to feel as though every time someone talks about it, there's another word being added to the end of it.
Yes. I think we're up to 7 or 8 or 9 now, if you look at the literature. They call them all the Fs. So there's feed, there's the one that rhymes with duck, there's...
Oh, right. Okay. Jeez. Okay. I mean, that's...
Survival response.
That's a response. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. But I think at the core of it, it's the knee-jerk reaction. It's the survival instinct that the animal side of us requires to be here. And so fight, flight, or freeze is kind of what I've associated with all of that. I certainly know that for myself, generally when I'm backed into a corner, there's one that I typically lean on, which is fight. But I've also known myself in certain situations there is a freeze. So it's not
How
always...
does that manifest for you?
Well, quite literally, you just stop. And you stop and you think. And it's not necessarily that you're fawning. For me, at that point, it's a stop and think. But it's that sort of, I wouldn't say paralysis, it's just like a stop. And you're there thinking, you're going, So when I first heard about all of this, it was more like you're usually one out of the three. As opposed to you actually might use all of them at different times in different situations. But you might naturally go into one more than the other. So for me, that sort of fight, step up and I'll step up too kind of thing, as opposed to other ones that are flight, step up and they run away. Where like stepping up and fighting isn't necessarily the best thing to do when you're against a 400 kilo brown bear, right? That's not a great thing to do, right?
Yeah.
Flight is absolutely the right decision. And sometimes freezing and taking a moment is kind of required. So I guess what we're going to talk about in this episode is a little bit about each, but also just sort of understanding why they're there, how they're there, and then in the future episodes, we'll deep dive on each of them. We'll give you
we're gonna
all
have
the
an
Fs.
episode each. Most of them. We're going to cover most of them, okay?
Are we going to say the most important Fs?
Yeah, so I love that. You know, it's really interesting. I had someone in our Rise and Thrive program. This was a long time ago now. This would have been early last year. And afterwards we were chatting and they said to me, you know, I had to look up what is the nervous system? Like, when you talk about the nervous system, what do you actually mean? And I was like, wow, okay, that's such helpful feedback, because it never occurred to me before to actually explain the nervous system and what it is. When I say nervous system, what am I talking about? What are the structures involved? How does it work? How does it control our body, right? So that was really good feedback for me, because I took it for granted that it was common knowledge when we use the word nervous system, that people just get it. They know what I'm talking about. And so at the most fundamental level, when we talk about the nervous system within our body, if I said the muscular system, people are like, oh yeah, they're the muscles. If I said the skeletal system, most people might go, oh yeah, they're our bones. It's our skeleton. So our nervous system is all of our nerves, essentially. It's the system in our body of all of the nerve cells. So basically there's branches. We've got central, which is in the center of our body. Go figure. The central nervous system is like our brain and our spinal cord. They're the control centers of the body. So the brain and spinal cord control all of our movement, our muscle contraction. It's the pathways connecting our brain to our muscles, our sensory organs,
it controls reflexes and stuff as well.
Yeah, our muscles, our glands, our organs, everything. So super important, right? That's the central nervous system. But then we've got this peripheral nervous system. Now, the peripheral nervous system is the bit that comes off the central nervous system. So we've got all these branches. It looks like a big tree that comes out of our spinal cord.
So if we have like thick branches is the main central nervous system, and the little branches
spinal cord
coming off that are this other one you're talking about. Yep.
Exactly. So imagine in a tree, you've got the trunk. Well, the trunk would be the spinal cord. And then you've got the branches, and they're like your peripheral nerves that all kind of come off it. But in the peripheral nervous system, from there, again, it branches out again. This is super easy to remember because some things are automatic. So think like our glands, our internal organs, our blood vessels, our
heartbeat. Is this for the heartbeat?
Our blood pressure, all these kinds of automatic things. The pupil dilation, the things that happen automatically that we don't have to do anything for. And guess what? That is called our autonomic nervous system. It's the easiest one to remember, because I always think, what's the word that reminds me of automatic? It's autonomic.
Autonomic, okay.
Yeah. So the autonomic nervous system has then two branches. Now, in almost all of my work, in terms of the therapeutic side of it, we're working with primarily the autonomic nervous system. Now, the reason for this is because the autonomic nervous system has a parasympathetic branch and a sympathetic branch. So the sympathetic is, when would we have sympathy for someone? When they're stressed, when they're sad, when they're worried, when they're concerned, when they're feeling those big things, right? So I remember it as going, the sympathetic division is the one that's reacting to stress. It's reacting to those situations. That's the sympathetic. That's what's driving our fight and flight responses. The parasympathetic is quite different. The parasympathetic is the nervous system branch that drives our rest and digest. So when we're not under threat, it's our parasympathetic division that is at work, and it's conserving energy, trying to support us in our recovery. So what I often find is that when people are experiencing chronic stress, when people are experiencing this absolute annihilation of their sympathetic nervous system, it's like being on a seesaw, and the heavy side is the sympathetic, and parasympathetic needs to be brought back into balance. And we can do that either by making the sympathetic lighter or the parasympathetic heavier. Does that kind of make sense?
So they can't both be fully activated at the same time. It's quite literally when there's balance, or like if one's, let's just say for argument's sake, you're highly stressed, everything's just really, like your sympathetic is in full go, you obviously can't have the sympathetic at full go and the parasympathetic at full go at the same time, because that's not how seesaws work.
Well, okay,
Or-
maybe I used a terrible analogy.
Okay.
So I'll look at this like a bank balance. If you
Gotcha.
want a healthy bank balance, what are the two ways you can go about it? You can either deposit more money
Yeah. Increase income. Yep.
or reduce the withdrawals.
Gotcha.
And so when I'm talking about this balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic, what I would like you to imagine is that if someone's chronically stressed, well, one of the things we could do is we could eliminate some stress. We could resolve some trauma that is causing that chronic stress and that sympathetic load. So what that means is that gets lighter. We stop withdrawing so much. But also, what are some other things we could do? Well, we could rest, we could take a bath, we could do some Pilates, we could do some breathing, we could do all these other things, which is the deposits. So that's increasing the parasympathetic, the rest and digest stuff. So your meditation, your breath work, all of those things are focusing on parasympathetic, and it's got to be really a combination of both. But I've used the example before. It's like, if my house was on fire and I rang the fire brigade and they showed up and put out the fire, that's like saying, hey, I'm going to smash the parasympathetic nervous system with all of this rest and digest and all of these tools. But if I haven't dealt with the issues that's causing the fire in my sympathetic division, eventually the fire brigade's going to go, bro, stop burning your house down.
Okay. So the sympathetic is like the constant candle being lit under the curtain
Yes.
that you keep on doing. Okay.
Exactly.
So
and that's
it's like,
really important.
So in the past we've talked about capacity. You know, when you've got a lot of capacities, imagine like you can do it either way. Either you have lots in your bucket, which means it can overflow and you've got plenty of capacity. So as it gets taken out, there's still plenty there. What we're kind of saying is that in this analogy, the bucket's full of water when you're at sort of full parasympathetic, but as you get into sympathetic, it sort of drains it and you don't have capacity. So when you hit rock bottom, there's nothing to sort of give, or, the terminology's been, it's hard to give out of an empty cup, hard to pour out of an empty cup.
Yeah.
And so it's that balance of you can be tipping in and tipping out almost at the same time.
That's right. You can be pouring into a sink but not have the plug in.
Yeah.
And what happens? Well, the net effect is no benefit. The sink's not going to fill.
And so with the sympathetic nervous system, obviously it's very easy to know when you're in it if you're staring at your house going in flames or you're running from a 400 kilo brown bear. Very clear to know, okay, I'm not really in, and you've spoke about before, in the frontal cortex, I think you sort of said, that sort of thinking about it. It's just, I've got to run, right?
Yep.
It's that survival mode. It's the fight, it's the flight, it's all of that. And then after that, you can sort of come down and you start to process it and so forth. But there's other ways you can be in it, but not deeply in it, but constantly in it, which I think we're going to be talking more about.
Totally.
Because there's, the house may not be on fire, but mortgage repayments are coming.
Yes.
There may not be a 400 kilo brown bear, but you're going from a job that you may not be hugely happy with, potentially in a relationship you're not hugely happy with, and it's not necessarily pouring in, you're pouring out a lot more, but you're in a constant state of it, almost to the point where you've been in it for so long, it almost feels like it's homeostasis. It feels like it's normal.
Exactly. And you get this thing called homeostatic sway, and what that means is like your zero line starts to shift. So your baseline changes and becomes a new normal, which is why in the healing process, part of what we have to do is we actually have to bring our homeostasis. We actually have to change our 0 point because to a new normal. That's
as opposed to putting up with, I'm always going to be depleted.
Yeah.
As opposed to, yes, you're never going to stop stuff emptying out. That's just like the flow of energy. Energy comes in, energy is going to go out. It's not about being constipated and just stopping the flow out, because that's not movement. That's not healthy.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
some people kind of think, if I just get rid of all of the the issues, then I'll be fine. Well, that's never going to be the case. That's kind of what it's not designed for either.
That's right.
It's being able to minimize the ones that are constantly drawing that you have control over, so you have more capacity to control the ones that are coming in.
Yeah, that's right.
And yeah.
We had a situation in our current cohort of Rise and Thrive where someone had shared, this is happening and I'm having this trauma response. It's the first time I've ever had awareness of it. Can you help me with some tools or some strategies to deal with that trauma response? So from a nervous system perspective, what this person was communicating is that I have awareness based upon this perceived threat. I have awareness of my sympathetic nervous system activating. My heart rate might be higher in the cases of this, like might be preparing your muscles to run. It might be increasing your heart rate, your body temperature, right? They had awareness of their sympathetic nervous system activating in response to the perceived threat. What they were asking for is, can you give me some tools so that I can activate my parasympathetic nervous system to try and counterbalance the threat?
Gotcha.
Except my response to that was, well, let's resolve the trauma that's making you perceive this situation as threatening to begin with. Because there's no point trying to put out a fire of the highly flammable thing without removing the highly flammable thing. So that's essentially what we did. Rather than going, tools and strategies are super helpful and super effective for when you're in the moment, sure. But my point is, why settle for having tools and strategies? Like in my home, I've got a fire blanket, but I sure as hell don't want to have to use it. Nice to have, helpful to have, but isn't the preference to not ever have to use it? So for me, I'm like, yeah, let's fill your toolbox. Let's give you all the tools to be able to support your nervous system and to respond with breathing techniques and, sensory stuff. But let's actually go one further and go, what is the threat that your nervous system is perceiving, and either change it? Because if it's a real threat, then you need to actually make some changes in your life. If you're in a relationship that is emotionally and psychologically unsafe, well, guess what? You can breathe all you like. It's not going to change the fact that your sympathetic nervous system is doing exactly what it needs to do to keep you alive. You might be in a job that is absolutely toxic and dysfunctional. Same thing. It's an actual threat to your nervous system. So your sympathetic nervous system has to be activated to keep you alive and to drive action to move you away from the threat. So I look at it and go, okay, from my professional perspective, is it honoring that person for me to enable them to stay in that dysfunctional relationship or in that toxic workplace or in that threatening situation by simply giving them the toolbox that's helping them to be regulated enough to be there? Or do I support them and empower them and equip them to know, to be able and ready to move away from that threat and actually create an environment of safety? And it's so tricky to navigate that. So I look at that and go, it's got to be both. You have to be able to, first of all, determine, is it a real threat or is it not? Really, I guess, resonating with one of our recent episodes around, is this really toxic or am I overreacting? Kind of similar concept. If it's a real threat, then I don't want to have to help you to learn how to regulate in a real threat. I want to equip you to feel safe to evade the threat. That's going to be the best way to help you. Yeah.
Well, I think the thing that came up to me, a couple of things, when you sort of said, is it a real threat? Well, if it's a real threat or not, who's a judge of that? Your body is saying it's a threat. Whether it's a perceived threat or a threat that's being projected into that situation, for me is a difference. Because as you were saying that, I'm thinking to myself, well, actually, your nervous system isn't something that you fight against, isn't something to fix. It's actually something that is leading you to safety always.
Yes.
What gets in between all of that is our judgment of, hang on, should this be activated? Do I have to deal with it? Because for argument's sake, let's just take the judgment out of it. If my nervous system gets activated and I'm at a job where it's constantly activated, the solution is to leave the job. Oh, very easy to say, David. That's great. Next. However, I've got bills. I've got this. I don't know if I could do something else. What if I go somewhere else and I still have the same problem? What if you move out of the body saying, I need to get out of this, into your head of all the reasons why you can't. Mm-hmm. And then it could be, but what is it about the job? Or it's really just this person, or it's really just this project, or it's really just this thing. If I could just get through it, then everything will be okay. But look, I've got all this stuff I need to do at home. The mortgage is just going up. I really need to renovate. The car needs a new Hoobadango. And, you know what? This is all too much. I just want to go home, have a glass of wine and relax. Mm-hmm. So, however, it doesn't kind of fix the problem, but these are all real things, because suddenly
100% it is.
You've got this thing that's being activated. Your fight or flight's being activated, whether it's environmental or whether it's something in the environment that you're projecting from a past trauma. It's here. Then you combine that with your overwhelm. Well, now you've just got a double word score. Great.
100%.
So definitely the perceived, like if it's a real threat, it's a real threat. If your body feels it, guys, it's a real threat.
So I want to differentiate that. If it's happening in your body, it's real. Your threat response, whether or not there's a real bear in the room or not, your threat response in your body is 100% real.
100%, yep.
It's just whether or not the bear is in there right now, or if it's a bear from the past or a bear from the future that you're bringing into your body.
Exactly.
Right now.
So for an argument's sake, you could be sitting there doing this wonderful podcast called the Remind Podcast, and outside you see some rustling in a bush. And then you realise, well, actually the last time there was a rustle in the bush, a 400-kilo bear jumped out and took after me, right? And then so that's a way in which you can sort of project into that situation, even though it was just a bird that's about to fly, to fly out. Either way, it's a real feeling.
Absolutely.
And so to be able to look at how do we deal with these things, and when you talked about there's no way you can meditate, you can breathe, you can, in a situation where there's something breathing down your neck, obviously that's environmental. How do you deal with that? Now imagine you can't see it, which I think is probably the one that really gets past most people's radars. Because everyone's guaranteed, put a bear in front of most people, they'll know exactly what to do. However, it's that real silent one that wants to sort of sit there and just constantly sit under the radar, and you don't necessarily know where it's coming from. And then it's about feeling into your body to then go, okay, what is it exactly? Is it the environment, or am I projecting something into the environment that I experienced in the past?
Yeah.
Is it this person? Is it this situation? Is it, all of that? And so it's because the capacity it takes out of you, and that, what did you call it? It was like that new normal, right?
Yeah.
That's sort of in the negative. If you sit in that too long, you'll get drained.
Absolutely.
And that's where a large portion of people are sitting these days. Based on
burnout.
the fact, based on the fact that people have sort of said, well, hey, look on the bright side. At least you've got, just work through it. You'll get there. It's that, and I know that narrative's changing. But it's one of those things where you need to look at what is it, and your gut knows. Absolutely. Your gut knows.
Yep, totally. And I feel like that's really, really an important, a really important part of the conversation. Yeah, I've got about 7 competing thoughts right now.
They've all just crashed together.
Yeah.
I'm just picturing like all these little people running in with their hands up in the air with a piece of paper, all running into the centre, and they've all just gone bang.
All the paper. What I was actually seeing was like, imagine an upside down bottle, and all of the thoughts were all racing to get down to the like hole to
The
come
bottleneck,
out,
yep.
and they all just crammed in there, and were like, nope, it's not coming out. But where do we want to take this? So I think the winning thought is that I want to encourage people. At the end of the day, we're animals, and we have a nervous system that is always doing exactly what it needs to do, or at least what it thinks it needs to do to survive. And that survival might even be to prevent us having to experience discomfort, or prevent us having to experience pain, or prevent us having to experience whatever. Now, something that is really tricky for us to comprehend is like, we as humans have consciousness. And that's kind of what separates us. We have conscious thought, and we have emotion and empathy and all these kinds of things. Now, when you think about the animal kingdom, there's a hierarchy in the animal kingdom of who can eat who, basically. And why do they eat? Because we need food to survive. And the reality is that for many animals, other animals are their food source. So that's a necessary part of survival, but there's no flow and effect. There's no conscious awareness or consciousness that goes, well, if I eat that animal, then they won't have a friend, and they won't have a mummy anymore, and all this. It's just, no, it's survival. I'm going to eat you, and there's no care about who's going to get hurt in the process. And I think one of the things that I find with dysfunctional fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses is that we inadvertently behave like the animals that we are for our own safety, survival, and comfort, and we hurt people in the process. So if we are acting out from our own fight response with aggression or self-defense, well, we might actually hurt people through that. But the priority in that moment was our survival and comfort, not thinking about the effect of that survival or comfort on someone else. And so where we bring in consciousness, which the only thing that separates us with our nervous system to other animals is that cognitive capacity, the ability to think, logic, reasoning, that sort of stuff. So when you bring that in, that's the difference between a reaction. Remember, we spoke about reflexes being automatic versus responses, which are intentional. Because when we respond, we will be conscious, i.e. we'll use that higher cognitive processing, the more recently evolved brain. We will use that to go, how do I want to respond in a way that loves and honors this person right now, where I can still uphold my boundary and I can still let them know that I'm not going to tolerate that, but in a way that loves and honors them. That's kind of how we can leverage that response, and we can still use the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn to drive our decisions, to drive our the conversations we have, to drive the boundaries that we set, to drive the situations that we remove ourselves from. But instead of it being a reactive survival reaction, it becomes an intentional, conscious, responsive choice. And so to understand that, I think, is really important, because the goal is never to not have a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. The goal is to be able to have the response in our nervous system, pause because we've got awareness of the reaction or of that activation. I call it activation. If we have awareness of that activation, the goal is never to activate. The goal is to live our lives, engage with society, have relationships, observe the activations in our nervous system, and use that to inform our responses. If our nervous system is becoming activated, then we get curious and we go, what's this about? And I think that's the key. I don't even know what else to say about it.
Yeah, well, look, I as you were saying that, it reminded me of what it's like to be in a building, right? Let's just say a multi-story building, and the fire alarm goes off.
Yeah.
Right? That's a big activation. There's loud sounds, depending on the building, automatic doors close. People then start to look around and then they start to walk out. It's not a very pleasant environment. So that could be an activation of your nervous system. Mm-hmm. Also, an activation of your nervous system could be like a warning dialogue box that comes up on your computer.
Yes.
Like, dong.
The engine light.
Oh, the check engine light,
yeah.
Right? So when I sort of look at, okay, imagine someone who is constantly dealing with something, even though rationally the brain's saying, everything I see out here, I don't see a threat. Yeah. Physically, I'm not seeing a threat. Or the brain's saying you're overreacting, like you're gaslighting yourself, right? Yeah. And then, but you're constantly walking around like there is a fire alarm in the building, constantly. And so the aim is to tune it out, or to whatever it is. I think it's really important to understand that your body is driving you to safety. Stop judging what that is. Yeah. Don't downplay it, because intelligently you probably go, I'm overreacting. Well, here's the thing. Whether you're overreacting or not is now irrelevant, because the alarm is going off.
Ding, ding.
Now, whether it could just be a malfunctioning board in the building, whether it's someone's just burnt toast in the kitchen on floor number 9, whatever it is, right? That you need to deal with that. So I think, and I've been a huge sort of, sufferer of it. I think I'm smarter than my nervous system.
Yes. Oh,
okay. It's sort of like, no.
We think we can out-logic it. Just apply some cognitive intervention to your instinctive animalistic nervous system.
Absolutely. So there's an oil fire. I'm just going to put water on it. Whoops. So, and for those that don't know, if you put water on an oil fire, it just goes, right? So it's about sort of going, okay, take the logic out of your nervous system, and for once go, I am feeling this way, honour it, and then follow the rabbit, whether you think it's reasonable or not.
Yep. Because
understanding that part leads you to it. Now, it might be this is normal. Well, if you live next to a tip, then the sense of like what you smell every morning, it's going to become very normal. Someone else comes to your place and they go, ooh, it's a bit fragrant, right? It doesn't mean, just because it's normal doesn't necessarily mean that's where you need to be. Yeah. Now, I have no problem with anyone living wherever. It's just more about if your body's crying out and your nervous system is going, if you can't find that peace and relax, because I think it'd be very hard to be, and I'll probably need you to clarify this, but it'd be very hard to be in your, what is it? The one fight, is it parasympathetic or sympathetic? I can never remember. Which one is it?
Remember, who needs sympathy?
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So if you're in your sympathetic, right, it's very difficult to be mindful. It's very difficult to feel joy. It's very difficult to feel positive. It's very difficult to feel peace, right? So if you can't feel any of these things, it's not because you haven't downloaded the latest update on joy, peace, and mindfulness. It's the fact that you're probably still sitting in that. So in my mind at this point, maybe your seesaw is actually a very good analogy, because if you are in that state of sympathetic response, your nervous system is activated, then you simply don't have access to all of these other things.
Yep.
So, but you can have access to your intelligence. Mm-hmm. And generally most people use their intelligence that way. So your body's leading you to safety. Whether you agree with it or not, that's up to you.
Yeah.
If you don't agree with it, well, it's not like your body's going to go, okay, got it, I'll just be all right now.
Yes, exactly. Yes. This is what I say to people when, the one part of the nervous system I didn't get to talk about was the somatic nervous system. So, working our way back to the top, you've got the nervous system, central, peripheral. That's the first split. And under peripheral, we have the autonomic, which I already spoke about. That's your sympathetic and parasympathetic.
The breathing, heartbeat, yeah.
But then you've also got the somatic nervous system, which is further split into sensory and motor. So the somatic nervous system is really important because that carries all the sensory information and controls our movement of our muscles. Anytime we have an activation of a muscle, when a muscle tightens, stiffens, responds with any kind of muscle contraction, think about when we're feeling stressed, what happens? We get tight, we get heavy, we get, maybe constriction in the throat. There is a very important aspect of the somatic nervous system and the responses and awareness of these responses in our healing journey. And it really excites me because there's a whole arm of therapy now called somatic healing. And that is what this is all about. So it's literally focusing on the somatic nervous system. So with the somatic nervous system, as I said, you've got the motor system, which basically brain sends signals down the spinal cord. From there, that signal gets distributed out to the muscle, let's say. So that's the motor division, the movement division, because we're activating muscles. And that's what's causing in our stress responses the tension, the tightness. Motor division is really important in that. But then there's also this sensory division, which is the information coming from our sensory receptors in both outside and inside of our body, back into the spinal cord, back up to the brain for us to process and interpret. And so a huge part of understanding any kind of therapeutic modality is that we can't think. We've already established we can't cognition our way out of this. When this is the stuff at the nervous system that is literally driven by our survival, talk-based therapy purely focused on cognition alone is not going to make the changes. I'm not going to say not going to help, because sometimes it can help to be heard and to be held, but the changes of these automatic reactions at the nervous system level, it can't change it. So as I said, there's a whole arm of therapeutic modalities now that's purely somatic. So it'll use movement and sensory stuff to release trauma. There's like whole entire somatic workouts and stuff that you can do purely, really commonly focused around the hips. We tend to store a lot of trauma and emotion in our hips. But there's also the autonomic division, and those two. So in my work, you have to do both. So one is top down, the other is bottom up processing, because tying in our autonomic nervous system and understanding how our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems actually work, how they're activating and they're keeping us safe and trying to protect us. But then also having really great awareness of the sensations in our body and what's activated, what muscles, where in our body, what does it feel like? What are the sensations I'm perceiving? That's the somatic side of it, because trauma and emotion affects all of it. It affects the autonomic and it affects the somatic. So unless we're actually tuning into all of it, no healing modality can actually really get to the root cause of it without covering all of those things. So I find that people, when they can really start to understand this, if they have an experience in the past and that experience, let's say someone screamed in my face, and from that moment, actually, no, you know what? I'm going to use a real life example, only because I spoke about this today. In my childhood, my dad drove a diesel vehicle, and that there was trauma around my dad, right? So as an adult, when my partner would arrive at my house in his diesel vehicle, no amount of logic and rationality that I loved him, I was excited to see him, we're going to have a great time together, I couldn't logic my way out of this activation in my nervous system. It was irrational, it was illogical, it made no sense. And at the time I was like, man, why do I get so stressed? If we meet out, have a great time. If I go to his house, have a great time. But when he comes here and I hear his car in the driveway, I am activated. Yeah, fight and flight mode, activated. Now, I have to, first of all, in order for me to even recognize that that fight and flight mode was activated, I had to have awareness of the somatics. The somatics is, oh my gosh, what is that? Where am I feeling that? What's that sensation? Oh my gosh, I feel this crushing on my chest. My stomach is in knots. My throat feels tight. I can feel that in real time because the muscles are activated. That's real. The second part is then going, what is this? What is this bringing up for me? And that's the mind part. And through that process, I was able to recognize that the association I made was diesel vehicle equals protect, self-preserve. Like literally I've got to protect and defend myself because, you know, tension is about to enter the atmosphere. And that's a perfect example of understanding.
That's a brilliant example, because let's just assume you're not as aware, right? Let's just say, Ash, we go back many years, and how would that play out with someone who doesn't have access to that awareness? Then what would that look like? So my guess is going to be, car turns up in the driveway, you feel uneasy at best.
You might not even know it though.
Well, that you'd have to feel something.
A lot of people don't. A lot of people are so cut off from their sense of feeling that it comes out through their reactions. They might be cold, they might be snappy, they might not greet them when they come through the door, they might give them the cold shoulder, they might unconsciously avoid eye contact. So that's the really interesting thing, is that so many people don't have awareness that they don't feel okay, but they behave in a way that shows it.
Right. So, yeah, in my mind, because it's been my personal experience, I can always, if I'm being an idiot, if I'm being nasty, if I'm being short, I can definitely feel I'm in a mood. In the past, I didn't know where it came from.
Yeah.
But I would definitely know, wow, something's not right. But I would then sort of logic my way out of it, or go suck it up, or, you know, whatever it is, shush it away, but it wouldn't change my behaviours. But I would always feel in myself something's wrong.
Yeah.
So what you're sort of saying is some people may not know something's wrong, but their behaviours point to something's wrong because they're not normally like that.
Exactly. And the crazy thing is that there can be such a lack of awareness. So something I see really commonly is, let's say, for instance, you've got, I'm using this as an example, please don't take this as gender stereotyping or anything, but let's say, for example, you've got a male partner who's saying, oh, you're always, you know, you're being a bitch, a B. And
you've already said it, you might as well lean into it.
And the female partner is going, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. Because
all my friends tell me I'm not.
They literally, that too.
My parents don't say I'm not. It's you that's a problem.
Yes, but because there's such a lack of awareness, and this can go both ways, of course, that lack of awareness means that they don't even see it, that not even through their behaviours. They're oblivious to it. And one of the things that's really interesting in the journey of the work that I do with people is holding them in that space and in that moment of revelation, of seeing their trauma responses, of actually starting to understand these trauma responses, to be able to observe them for the first time and going, oh, I was such a bitch. Oh my gosh, I had no idea. I didn't mean to be. I wasn't trying to be. And there's this feeling of like, oh, I want to make it better. Oh, and it's absolutely crazy. We've got to process then the grief when we have awareness of things that we're playing out completely unconsciously with no malicious intent, but purely self-preservation. But the other people are on the receiving end of that self-preservation behavior. And often of things that, you have no logic for.
And without that awareness, what are you going to, the natural conclusion as you're telling the story is it wouldn't be unreasonable for you to sort of think, okay, well, your partner's a problem because you feel that way when they're turning up. But it's not necessarily the case. So, okay, so what we, if there are, and, because to be able to do detective work, to pull it down to the sound of a diesel engine, I mean, that takes real awareness. And then to go backwards to go where it came from.
Yeah.
But, being at the start of it, it's sort of going, okay, if you feel yucky, there's something yucky happening. Don't gaslight yourself. Don't put yourself down. Your nervous system is smarter than you're actually giving it credit for.
Yeah. Our nervous system's way smarter than us.
The second thing is, it may not be exactly what your brain is figuring out, right? In Ash's case, she didn't put all the pieces together because she had the magnifying glass, the Sherlock Holmes hat, and then followed the clues. There were no clues apart from the sound of a diesel engine.
And observing. It was purely observing what was coming up in my body. When have I felt this before? What's the pattern? That's all you've got to go by.
Exactly.
Observation.
But the observation of the feelings.
Yes.
So it's sort of like you can't brain your way out of this. Mm-hmm. You can use your brain to assist, but you will not brain your way out of it. Because there's no way you could sort of say this person turning up at this point and this person turning up at these points. There's something different. It could be the fact of the possibilities could be huge.
Yeah, yeah. This is so powerful. Actually, sorry to jump in, but something that's coming to me is how frequently this forms the basis of relief for people and freedom for people when you have awareness in your body of how does that feel for you now. So I'll give you an example. Recently had a client who had gone into a massive trauma response, and people might hear trauma response and think it's like, this big emotional thing. No, it was an activation of the nervous system of one of these responses. They became activated when they went to visit a family member. And that then carried over into their weekend. They became reactive with children and so on and so forth. And when I said to them, what about visiting the family member was so activating for you? Because I won't go into that, but ultimately we were able to narrow down exactly what it was. And so from there, when you go, oh my gosh, yes, how do you narrow it down? You try out some things and see what your body does in response. So would it feel for you if instead of going to their house, you gave them a call and said, hey, I'd love to have you over for morning tea. How about I come and pick you up and I'll drop you home once we're done? Oh my gosh, that feels so much better. Or how does it feel in your body to go, hey, I'd love to spend time with you. How about I pick you up and we go to the shops or we go to a cafe and then, we can spend a bit of time together and then I'll drop you home. That feels so much better. Amazing. And so that's when, for me, I'm looking at it and go, I've been in a position recently where I've had to make a pretty big decision. And it's a significant financial investment decision. And my body was going, no, activation in my body. That means for me that's not aligned for me. But when I started to question and go, how does it feel by Christmas? It was still a no. What if it was March? It was still a no. But as soon as I said, how about mid next year? I went, yeah, that feels really good. And so I know for me, the answer is mid next year because my nervous system went, yeah. That feels heaps better. And so I use this. This is a tangible, practical thing. This is walking and talking in line with using your somatic nervous system to actually help to interpret your autonomic nervous system. And go, how does that feel for me? Oh yeah, that feels so much better. How does that feel for me? Oh yeah, that feels so much better. It's life-changing.
And I think that's really important. A bit like yourself, you can use yes or no questions to yourself to sort of gauge how you feel. So this is where you're using the brain in tandem with your body and your feeling. And like, as you said before, if you're being cut off at the neck, right? Yeah. And you can't feel down there, it's probably not that you can't feel, it's just there's probably so much going on that it's just so loud you couldn't even hear a chainsaw starting.
Yeah.
Right.
And so it can be overwhelmed. and it can also be a survival response. If it was unsafe for you to feel, or if you were punished for feeling, or rejected for feeling, or isolated for feeling, guess what you're going to do to survive? Cut off that feeling. Very common in males.
And I would sort of say that those people that feel that way, they're protecting themselves from the downside, which is the feeling, but they're also being cut off from the upside. So it's like if you're thinking to yourself, "Oh, am I one of those people?" When was the last time you were so excited your gut felt like it was just absolutely shaking, but just from pure excitement? Like that real passion. And if it's all like, "Well, no, I'm not that kind of guy or woman." Well, is that, okay. Is that maybe a clue, potentially? Or it's just, you don't have a lot of excitement, or you don't want to show excitement. But when you, let's just say, you get out of your head, you go into your body, and it goes from in your head, it's a library, in your body, it's a rock concert, right? Constantly. So you couldn't even hear anything. And as Ash was saying, you want to make a decision, yes or no question, and you want to feel what your body's doing. And in the back corner, there's something with a megaphone yelling out, but you just can't hear it because the rock concert's still going. Typically, that's what we're talking about, the unprocessed trauma.
Yeah.
And so your body's constantly going where whatever's happening, there is something that's on high alert. The siren's going off. There's all these things happening. So it's bit by bit when you realize, or when you give your nervous system the credit to say, regardless of what it is, I am not feeling safe, no matter how ridiculous it sounds. You eat an elephant bite by bite, right? And for the vegetarians out there, it's just a reference. I don't eat elephants.
Eat a bush.
How do you eat a tree? Yeah, bite by bite, right? And so as you're not just going to do the whole thing, Control, Alt, Delete, wipe the whole thing. That'd be lovely, by the way. But when you're doing that, suddenly, bit by bit by bit by bit, you start to go from these really big sensations, like really not feeling safe to calm, till you can start to feel the nuances. That feels kind of okay, but there's something not quite right about it. Versus, that's a hard no. Like, bah! Versus, oh, this feels incredible, amazing. Then you feel like there's a bit of a spectrum. But that all happens in the body, in the feeling.
Yeah.
And it's kind of when we talk about feeling or having the trauma stored in the body, it's pretty much hand in hand, the nervous system.
100%.
Like it's all there.
That's how we're experiencing it.
As you calm that down, as you sort of tick those off, as you start to pour or resolve or transmute those things, it becomes more calm. It doesn't stop you from being activated, because you want to be activated. You want to feel excitement. You want to feel passion. You want to feel all of those things. You don't want to just constantly be flat. Now that's relative to each people and personality types. But if you're not experiencing the down, you're cutting yourself from the up.
Yeah, absolutely. I am really excited to touch on some of the specific responses, and I anticipate that the next few episodes, guys, will be shorter, because we wanted to isolate each response so that it had its own episode. But really, there's not a lot to be said about each response. So click subscribe now, because I feel like the more that you can be open to receiving this information, deep diving and understanding how these nervous system responses manifest in our actions and behaviors in our daily life, that's what ultimately determines the health of our relationships, our friendships, our family, the experiences of our children under our care. All of these things, including workplaces, all of these things become fundamentally important, and the more that you can understand it and see it and pick it, it's going to be much easier to observe something that you can clearly see.
Yeah.
So click subscribe, join us next time, let us know what you thought of this episode, and we'll catch you then.
Till next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.